On her birthday, my girlfriend publicly thanked her ex for raising the bar. Everyone clapped. Then she glanced at me and said, "And thanks to him too, I guess." I just sat there. 2 days later, she found out what happens when you push a man too far. The room was full of people I didn't know, all laughing and drinking wine I'd paid for. It was my girlfriend Charlotte's 30th birthday party, an event she'd been planning for months. The theme was vintage Hollywood, and she was playing the part of the starlet perfectly. I was just part of the scenery, the guy in the background, making sure the catering was refreshed and the champagne kept flowing. The climax of the evening was the toast. Charlotte stood in the center of the room, holding her glass high. Her best friend, a woman named Becca, who always looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe, stood beside her, beaming. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," Charlotte began, her voice practiced and clear. "Turning 30 is a huge milestone, and I wouldn't be the woman I am today without the amazing people in my life." She went through the list. Her supportive parents, her wonderful friends. Then she paused for dramatic effect, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a handsome, smug-looking guy near the back. "And I have to give a special thank you to my amazing friend, Derek," she said, her voice full of emotion. "My ex, yes, but also the man who truly taught me what I deserve in life. He raised the bar for what a partner should be, and I will be forever grateful for the time we had." The room erupted in applause. People clapped, some even whistled. Derek, the ex, gave a gracious little bow. It was a beautiful, moving moment, a perfect piece of public relations. Then, as the applause died down, Charlotte's eyes flickered over to me, standing by the bar. It was almost an afterthought, a brief dismissive glance. "And thanks to him too, I guess," she said with a little wave of her hand in my direction. A few of her friends tittered with laughter. The message was clear, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike in front of 50 people. Derek was the standard. I was the footnote. The guy who was good enough for now but not good enough to mention by name. I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, my expression unchanged, and took a slow sip of my drink. My mind, however, was already in motion. A switch had been flipped. In my line of work, you don't get emotional when you're attacked. You get strategic. Charlotte had just launched an unprovoked, public attack on my reputation. She thought it was a social power play. She had no idea she had just declared war against a man who runs campaigns for a living. The election season had just begun. Let me be clear. I'm not a simp, I don't get played. I'm a political campaign manager. My job is to win. I take complex, often flawed candidates and build a narrative around them that leads to victory. I do opposition research, I manage messaging, I control the media cycle, and I identify and exploit the weaknesses of my opponents. My entire life is about strategy, perception, and the ruthless execution of a plan. I met Charlotte 8 months ago. I had just come off the most brutal campaign of my career, a successful but soul-crushing Senate race that had left me completely burned out. I was in what I call an off-season. I needed a break from the high-stakes world of politics. I needed something simple. Charlotte was simple. She was beautiful, fun, and uncomplicated. I knew what she was about. Her life was funded by a small trust fund and a series of projects that never seemed to pan out. She was obsessed with her ex Derek, a man who came from old money and embodied the effortless success she craved. I saw all the red flags, her constant name-dropping, her casual materialism, her need for public validation. But I wasn't looking for a life partner. I was looking for a temporary distraction, a low-stress personal project while I recharged my professional batteries. I was clear with her from the beginning. I told her I wasn't looking for anything serious, that I was just getting back on my feet after a demanding job. She agreed. The arrangement was simple. I provided the stability and lifestyle she enjoyed, and she provided the fun, easy companionship I needed. It was a mutually understood short-term contract. The problem is, she started to see the arrangement as a permanent position, and her performance, as demonstrated at her birthday party, had become unacceptable. She hadn't just insulted me. She had publicly defined me as inferior. In the world of campaigns, that's a narrative you have to kill before it takes root. So as I stood there listening to the party resume around me, I didn't feel hurt. I felt the familiar, exhilarating hum of a new campaign kicking off. My opponent? The Charlotte-Derek alliance. My objective, a complete and total electoral victory. That night, after the last guest had left and Charlotte was passed out in bed, I went into my home office and drew up the campaign plan. Update 1. A good campaign starts with a solid foundation of research. You can't defeat an opponent you don't understand. So, for the first 48 hours after the party, I became a one-man opposition research firm. My targets were Charlotte and her sainted ex, Derek. I started with Charlotte. I already had most of the data I needed. For the past 8 months, I had been the primary source of her discretionary funding. I went through my credit card statements, meticulously logging every expenditure. The designer clothes, the $500 dinners with Becca, the spa days, the weekend trips. I wasn't just tracking the money, I was mapping her entire lifestyle ecosystem. I knew her donors, me, her key supporters, her vapid friends, and her core message, a life of effortless luxury. Then I turned my attention to Derek. He was the ghost in our relationship, the gold standard she constantly compared me to. His public image was flawless. He was the founder of a buzzy tech startup, he drove a vintage sports car, and his Instagram was a curated gallery of his perfect life. But in my line of work, you learn that the shinier the image, the darker the secrets. I hired a freelancer, a digital forensics guy I use for digging up dirt on political opponents. I gave him Derek's name and his company's name. I didn't want anything illegal. I just wanted a clear picture of his financial and professional reality. While my researcher was digging, I initiated phase 1 of my own plan, narrative destabilization. Charlotte was still blissfully unaware. She thought I had just been in a bad mood at her party. She tried to smooth things over the next day. "You were so quiet last night," she said, pouting. "You didn't even tell me I looked pretty." I just told her I was tired. I let her believe her little power play had worked, that I was the one on the defensive. My first move was subtle. One of the pillars of Charlotte's social standing was a charity committee she was on. It was for a big, glamorous gala that happened every year. She didn't actually do any work, she just liked having her name on the letterhead. I, however, had made a significant donation to the charity in my name a few months prior, a fact she loved to brag about. I called the head of the organizing committee, a woman I knew professionally. I explained that due to some portfolio restructuring, I needed to pull my donation for the year. I was polite, apologetic, and vague. I knew the call would be followed by another call, from the committee head to Charlotte, asking what was going on with her incredibly generous boyfriend. The fallout was immediate. Charlotte confronted me that evening, her voice shaking with rage. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Cynthia from the committee called me. She said you pulled your donation. You're making me look like a fool." "It was a business decision, Charlotte," I said calmly, not looking up from my laptop. "Market conditions have changed. I'm reallocating my capital." "This isn't about capital," she shrieked. "This is about my reputation. You did this to punish me for what I said at the party." "What you said at the party was just data," I replied, finally looking at her. It helped me reevaluate the return on my investments. The charity gala, it turns out, is a bad investment. This was a calculated move. I was speaking to her in the only language she understood, the language of social currency and status. I had just devalued her primary asset. While she was reeling from that, my researcher came back with the gold mine I was hoping for. Derek's tech startup, Innovate Next, was a complete sham. It had no product, no revenue, and was burning through cash at an alarming rate. Its only funding came from a handful of early investors, mostly friends of his wealthy father, and a series of high-interest personal loans. Derek wasn't a tech genius. He was a trust fund kid playing entrepreneur with other people's money. The report also contained another beautiful detail. Derek's vintage sports car, the one he paraded all over town, it was a lease. A very expensive lease that was co-signed by his father. And he was 2 months behind on the payments. This was the core of my opponent's platform, a lie. And I was about to expose it. Update 2. The next phase of the campaign was to take the opposition research and weaponize it. A good campaign manager doesn't just release damaging information, they create a narrative around it. They build a story that the public can understand and that the media will amplify. My target audience wasn't the general public. It was the small, insular world of investors and socialites that Derek and Charlotte inhabited. I created a new, anonymous email address. From that address, I drafted a memo. It was written in the dry, analytical style of an investment prospectus. The subject line was, "An unsolicited due diligence report on Innovate Next." The memo was a masterpiece of corporate demolition. It laid out, in excruciating detail, the company's financial situation. It included their burn rate, their lack of a viable product, and a projection showing they would be insolvent in less than 6 months. It didn't make any accusations. It just presented the facts. The final page of the report was a list of publicly available records showing that Derek had a history of failed projects, all quietly funded and then buried by his father. I sent this memo to 3 people: Derek's father, the lead investor in his company, a man known for his ruthless business practices, and a well-known local business journalist who loved a good story about a failing startup. While that digital bomb was ticking, I moved to dismantle Charlotte's remaining support structures. Her best friend, Becca, was a key advisor in her campaign of entitlement. Becca worked as a personal shopper at a high-end department store. Her job depended on her reputation and her client list. I knew from listening to their conversations that Becca had a habit of borrowing clothes from the store for a weekend and then returning them on Monday. It was a common, if unethical, practice. I also knew that she was helping Charlotte do the same thing, using her employee discount to buy expensive outfits that Charlotte would wear once for an Instagram post and then return. I made another anonymous call, this time to the store's corporate loss prevention hotline. I reported that an employee at their flagship store was running a sophisticated return fraud scheme, costing the company thousands of dollars. I provided Becca's name, and I suggested they review the security footage and inventory logs for the past 6 months, paying close attention to high-value items that were returned on Monday mornings. With both of my primary opponents targeted, I just had to wait for the system to do its work. The first explosion came from Derek's camp. The business journalist ran a story a few days later, a brutal takedown of Innovate Next, calling it a vanity project and a case study in millennial entitlement. The lead investor, furious that he'd been misled, pulled his funding and threatened to sue. Derek's father, publicly humiliated, finally cut his son off. Derek, in a panic, called Charlotte, presumably for support, but Charlotte was dealing with her own crisis. Becca had been fired from her job. The store had indeed reviewed the security footage and found a mountain of evidence. She was not only fired, but the store was also pressing charges for theft. Becca, in her own panic, had immediately blamed Charlotte, telling the store that Charlotte had pressured her into it. The two of them were now locked in a bitter war, accusing each other of being the mastermind. Charlotte's world was imploding. Her social status was gone, her best friend was now her enemy, and her perfect ex-boyfriend was revealed to be a fraud. She was in a free fall, and she still hadn't realized I was the one who had cut her parachute. She came to me a week after the story about Derek broke. She was crying. Her whole life was falling apart. Derek had dumped her, saying he needed to focus on his problems and that she was a distraction. Becca was threatening to sue her. She was a social pariah. "I don't understand what's happening," she sobbed, sitting on the edge of our couch, my couch. "It seems like you're experiencing some market volatility," I said, my voice calm. She looked at me, her eyes full of confusion. Can I just stay here for a little while?" she asked, her voice small. "I have nowhere else to go." "No," I said. "Our contract has expired. It's time for you to find a new position." I handed her a box. "I took the liberty of packing some of your things." She was officially on her own. Final update: it has been a month since I initiated the campaign. Mel, the final results are in, and it was a landslide victory. After I told her to leave, Charlotte had a complete meltdown. She had no money, no friends, and no prospects. Her parents, who had always enabled her, were dealing with the financial and social fallout from Derek's public implosion and couldn't support her in the style to which she was accustomed. She tried to launch a smear campaign against me. She and what was left of her friend group tried to brand me as a cruel, hot, heartless monster who had abandoned her in her time of need. But they had no platform. Their social circles were in ruins. And more importantly, I controlled the narrative. I executed one final move. I gave an exclusive, off-the-record interview to the same business journalist who had exposed Derek. I framed it as the story of a successful private man who had been targeted by a group of social climbers, only to uncover a web of fraud and deceit. I didn't name Charlotte, but the details were so specific that anyone who knew the situation knew exactly who I was talking about. The story painted me as the victim who had smartly extricated himself from a bad situation. It was the perfect counter-narrative, and it inoculated me from any of her attacks. 2 days after that story ran, Charlotte showed up at my door. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just broken. She was sobbing, begging me to take her back, saying she had made a terrible mistake. I let her say her piece. When she was done, I just looked at her. "You haven't made a mistake, Charlotte," I said. "You've run a terrible campaign. Your strategy was flawed, your messaging was inconsistent, and your key supporters were unreliable. You chose the wrong opponent." She just stared at me, the final, horrifying realization dawning in her eyes. "This was you," she whispered. "All of it. The story, Derek, Becca, it was all you." "I manage campaigns," I said, my voice as cold and flat as a tracking pole. "You publicly attacked my character. I treated it as an in-kind donation to my own campaign. I used your attack to launch a counteroffensive. You thought we were in a relationship. We were in an election, and I never, ever lose." I closed the door. That was the last time I ever saw her. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had to move back home with her parents. Her trust fund ran out, and she's now working as a receptionist at a dentist's office. Derek is facing multiple lawsuits from his former investors. Becca is still dealing with the legal consequences of her return fraud. My revenge wasn't about yelling or screaming. It was about strategy. It was about taking the tools of my trade and applying them to my personal life. She saw me as a boring, stable provider, a footnote in the story of her glamorous life. She failed to understand that the quiet guy in the back of the room is often the one running the entire show. She thought she was the candidate. She never realized she was just the opposition. And the opposition never stood a chance.